I always thought betrayal came from strangers, not from the people who used to hold your hand when you were sick. Hello everyone, before we continue with today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't get to miss out on new videos from this channel. Subscribing is free, and it is the best way to support me in bringing you more dramatic stories. Please tell me, where are you watching from? I'm interested. Type where you are watching from in the comments section. Let's connect with one another. Now let's proceed. That morning was ordinary. The kind of quiet that follows when you've lived long enough to measure time in cups of tea and the creak of floorboards. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and the geraniums by the window. I remember sitting by the phone thinking about fairness, about the will Robert and I made years ago before he passed. My granddaughter Emily had just turned 10, and I wanted her name added to it. A simple thing. A small promise of love carried forward. So I called David. My only son. My pride. He answered after a few rings, his voice smooth, busy, always busy. Hi Mom. Everything okay? Yes dear, I said, trying to sound casual. I've been thinking about the will. I want to make sure Emily's included. There was a pause, not long but heavy enough to make my chest tighten. Mom, he said slowly, there's no will anymore. I laughed softly, thinking I misheard. What do you mean, no will? His tone changed, calm, rehearsed almost. It was revoked, remember? After you signed the medical power of attorney. My hand froze on the armrest. Revoked. The word didn't sound real. He continued, as if explaining something trivial. Yeah, you gave me control, remember? Everything's under my name now. It's just simpler legally. For a moment all I could hear was my own heartbeat. I wanted to speak, to argue, but my mouth felt full of cotton. You mean the papers from last year? The medical forms. Exactly, he said. The lawyer said it was the easiest way to handle things in case something happened to you. He sounded proud of himself, efficient, capable. But I could barely breathe. David, I whispered. I thought that was just for emergencies. For hospitals. He sighed. It covers that too. Don't worry, Mom. Everything's safe with me. And then he said it, the sentence that shattered the air between us. You gave me control. Remember. The call ended politely, the way one ends a grocery conversation. But the silence that followed felt like a scream. I sat there, staring at the phone as if it could explain itself. The words "you gave me control" kept circling in my mind like a cruel echo. I thought back to the day I signed those papers. David and Clara were here that afternoon, standing in my kitchen with smiles that looked like comfort. I remember the pen trembling slightly in my hand, my eyesight a little foggy, the lawyer's voice a blur. They told me it was just for my own good. A pen. A signature. A trust one thought was unbreakable. Now I felt the weight of that pen in my hand again, heavier than any truth I'd ever held. I looked around my living room, the soft light catching dust motes in the air, the photograph of Robert smiling from the mantel, his eyes still kind even in a frame. Did I really just give everything away, Robert? I asked the photo. Of course it didn't answer. My gaze fell to the bottom drawer of the cabinet, the one labeled estate. I opened it slowly. The folder where the will should have been was still there, but empty. A thin layer of dust coated the inside, like time mocking my trust. I touched the paper edges and felt something in me collapse. Not loudly but quietly, like a bridge giving way under too much silence. That night, I sat by the window, staring out at the streetlights flickering against the dark. My reflection looked back. A woman too proud to cry, too confused to sleep. Somewhere deep down a whisper surfaced. You didn't just lose money. You lost your name. I didn't know it yet, but that call was the moment my life split into before and after. People think betrayal feels like fire, something sudden, loud, consuming. But mine felt like water. Cold. Slow. Seeping into everything I thought was safe. After that phone call, the days blurred together. I kept replaying it like a song I couldn't turn off. His voice calm, factual. Asterisk, you gave me control. Asterisk, those 4 words followed me into sleep and met me again when I woke. At first, I told myself he must have misunderstood. David wasn't cruel. He was my son. The boy who used to bring me daisies from the backyard and call me his hero. Surely this was a mix-up. But beneath that hope was something darker. A tremor I couldn't ignore. So I decided to call the lawyer's office. It started coming back to me piece by piece that day months earlier. I'd just come home from the hospital after a bad fall. My ribs still ached, my energy thin. David and his wife Claire arrived with smiles and a tall man in a gray suit, Mr. Kenton, their family attorney. David hugged me gently. "Mom, this is just some paperwork to make sure we can handle things if you ever need medical help again. You don't have to worry about the details." I remember sitting at the dining table, the one Robert built by hand decades ago. The wood was worn smooth from family dinners, birthday candles, laughter. And now it was covered with legal papers. Clara stood behind me, her hand resting softly on my shoulder. "We just want you safe, Mom. So if you ever end up in the hospital again, we can make decisions quickly." Her voice was honey-sweet, and I wanted to believe her. The lawyer pointed to where I should sign. I was tired, dizzy, and honestly grateful that someone else seemed to understand all the formalities I didn't. I signed where he told me to. My hand trembled, the pen scratching unevenly across the page. "There," Clara said, smiling. "Now you'll never have to worry about anything again." Those words felt warm back then. Now they taste like poison. The receptionist's voice at the law office was bright and robotic. "Good morning, Kenton and Associates. How may I direct your call?" I explained who I was, and that I needed clarification on a document I signed with my son. She asked me to hold. A few minutes later she came back, her tone clipped, rehearsed. "Yes, Mrs. Harper, I see the file here. The document you signed was a durable power of attorney, granting full authority to Mr. David Harper over your estate and medical affairs. It automatically revoked your previous will." Her words hit like a hammer. "Revoked," I repeated. "But that can't be right. It was only supposed to be for medical emergencies." "I'm sorry, ma'am. It's legally binding. The documents were properly notarized and processed." I hung up before she could say more. My vision blurred. The room tilted. I wasn't just excluded, I was erased. For the rest of the day, I walked around my house like a stranger in someone else's memories. Every object, every photo, every letter from Robert seemed to whisper, "How could you let this happen?" I tried to tell myself it was temporary, that David would fix it, that maybe he'd misunderstood. But even as I made excuses, I could feel something heavy pressing on my chest. Not anger yet, not even grief, just shame, the kind that eats you quietly from the inside. I called my sister Marjorie. She's older than me, tougher, the kind of woman who still reads every receipt before signing anything. When she answered, I tried to sound calm. "Marge, something's come up with David and the will." Her voice sharpened immediately. "What do you mean something's come up?" I told her everything, the call, the papers, what David said. There was a long silence. Then in that steady, cutting way of hers, she said, "Evelyn, never sign anything they bring you again. Promise me." I wanted to protest. "He's my son, Marge. He wouldn't steal from me." She sighed. "You've always given him too much benefit of the doubt. You forget. Love doesn't cancel greed." Her words stung because they sounded like prophecy. That night I opened Robert's old desk. The smell of aged paper and cedar filled the air. Inside were receipts, insurance letters, the old will we wrote together. The one that said half would go to David and half to charity in Robert's name. Back then we thought fairness was eternal. Now the desk looked like a relic, a tomb for the woman I used to be. I ran my hand over the drawer handles. My reflection in the polished wood looked unfamiliar. Smaller, older, diminished. How could I have been so foolish? I whispered. But the truth was, I'd wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that my son loved me enough to protect me. That Clara's warmth was genuine. Because the alternative, that they'd plotted to take everything, was too unbearable to face. Over the next few days the changes started showing. Subtle at first. David began handling my bills without asking. My online banking password stopped working. When I called him about it, he said gently, "It's easier if I manage everything now. You've been forgetting things, Mom." Forgetting. That word lodged in my throat like a thorn. I wanted to argue, but I didn't have the energy. Instead, I nodded along, pretending it didn't sting. He even hired a house helper, who reported more to him than to me. The woman watched me like a nurse evaluating a patient. Every time I misplaced my glasses, I saw the pity in her eyes. Shame. Again and again, shame. One morning, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. Hair thinning, eyes tired, lips pale. I stared so long I almost didn't recognize myself. For a terrifying moment I thought, asterisk, maybe they're right. Maybe I am losing it. Asterisk. That thought, that seed of doubt, was their greatest weapon. Gaslighting doesn't shout. It whispers. It makes you question your own handwriting on a page you didn't read carefully enough. A week later, I found an envelope on my doorstep, bank correspondence, addressed to David Harper, primary account holder. My name was listed underneath, smaller like a footnote. That's when the denial cracked. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd signed those cursed papers. My hands trembled as I opened the drawer, the empty folder still there. I felt a wave of nausea, the kind that rises from deep regret. I whispered to myself, "You let this happen, Evelyn. You trusted them. You trusted him." The tears came slowly at first, then all at once. I cried for Robert, for the years of saving and planning, for the illusion that love automatically meant safety. A few days later, Marjorie came by. She brought soup and that fierce look only big sisters can manage. When she saw the papers, her face went pale. "He took everything," she said quietly. "Even your legal rights." I tried to defend him again, old habit. Maybe he didn't realize what it meant. Maybe Clara convinced him. Marjorie shook her head. "Stop protecting him. He's an adult, not a child." I didn't answer. I couldn't. But later that night, her words echoed. "Stop protecting him." The house was silent except for the ticking of Robert's old clock. I sat at his desk again, the empty folder in front of me. I remembered how careful I used to be, how I balanced checkbooks down to the cent, how I never missed a payment. Somewhere along the way, I traded that vigilance for trust. And now that trust had turned into my undoing. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I was so proud of him, Robert. I thought he was doing what you'd have wanted." A tear rolled down my cheek, landing on the empty folder. That's when it hit me. I hadn't just lost control of my finances. I'd lost the foundation of who I was. A lifetime of being dependable, responsible, self-sufficient, gone with one signature. That night I went to bed early, clutching my late husband's watch in my palm, the one David gave him years ago for Father's Day. The ticking felt slower, heavier, like time itself was mourning with me. As I drifted into a restless sleep, a sentence surfaced in my mind, one that felt like both confession and curse. I believed love could never betray me. I was wrong. And though I didn't know it then, that realization, painful as it was, would become the first step toward something I thought I'd lost forever. My will to fight. People talk about rock bottom as though it's a single moment. A crash, a thunderclap, a scene dramatic enough to recognize. But mine arrived quietly, disguised as a polite smile behind a bank counter. It was a Wednesday morning, one of those gray days when even sunlight feels reluctant. I hadn't planned on going to the bank that day, but something inside me, a small trembling pulse of instinct, told me to go. Maybe it was the way Marjorie's words had stayed with me, circling my mind like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Asterisk, stop protecting him. Asterisk. So I dressed with a strange sense of ceremony. My best coat. My pearls. I brushed my hair back the way Robert used to like, and for the first time in weeks, I looked at myself in the mirror without flinching. "You're still here," I whispered to my reflection. "You're still you." The bank smelled of air conditioning and faint perfume. I took my place in line, clutching my handbag tighter than usual. The young teller smiled as I approached, too young to understand the quiet panic of the elderly. "Good morning, Mrs. Harper. How can I help you today?" I'd like to check the balance on my account, I said, and withdraw some cash. She nodded politely and asked for my ID. I handed it over, heart thudding. For a few seconds everything seemed normal, the clicking of her keyboard, the polite hum of background chatter. Then her expression changed. Her brow furrowed slightly, as if reading something confusing on her screen. Mrs. Harper, she said carefully, I'm afraid I can't complete that transaction. I frowned. Why not? Well, she hesitated, lowering her voice. It appears your son, Mr. David Harper, is listed as the primary on this account. You're under secondary authorization. I stared at her, my lips parting but no words coming out. Primary. I repeated. This is my account. I've had it for over 30 years. She nodded sympathetically, but there was that look, the one people give when they realize you're about to break. I'm really sorry, ma'am. I can't override the access without his approval. His approval. My son's approval to access my own money. It was like hearing a stranger's name tied to my life. The teller's voice faded into the background. Something about procedure, verification, confidentiality. All I could think about was the day Robert and I opened that account together decades ago. How proud we'd been watching our savings grow. How every dollar represented effort, partnership, sacrifice. And now? It all belonged to someone else. Someone who once held my hand and called me Mom. A ringing started in my ears. The kind that comes when the body can't decide whether to cry or scream. My hands trembled, but I managed to whisper, "Can I see the file? The authorization?" She bit her lip. "I'm afraid I can't show you that without the primary holder present." Something inside me snapped, quietly but irrevocably. "I am the primary," I said, the words shaky but sharp. "He's my son, not my guardian." The teller shifted uncomfortably. People nearby started glancing over. I could feel their pity crawling across my back like cold rain. And that's when it hit me, how humiliation and invisibility can exist in the same breath. I muttered a thank you and left before the tears came. Outside, the air felt heavier. The sky looked bruised. I walked slowly to the bench near the parking lot and sat down, pressing my hand against my chest to steady the shaking. That's when the realization struck with full force, raw, undeniable. He made me sign my own disappearance. I thought of all the small ways it had happened, the smiles, the reassurances, the casual "don't worry, Mom." How easily kindness had been weaponized. I'd trusted him with my life, and he'd turned that trust into a cage. The anger that followed didn't come loud or violent. It came like warmth returning to frozen fingers, slow, painful, necessary. For the first time in months, I didn't feel helpless. I felt awake. I pulled out my phone, opened my notes app, and typed the first words of what would become my private record. April. David has full control of the accounts. The will is gone. The lawyer said the papers were legal. But I didn't understand what I was signing. I need to find out if that matters. As I typed, my hand steadied. My thoughts sharpened. I looked around at the world, the cars, the people walking by, and felt a strange clarity. No one could fix this for me. Not Marjorie. Not some distant lawyer. Not even Robert's memory. If I was going to take my life back, I'd have to start from nothing. And that terrified me, but it also thrilled me in a quiet, dangerous way. On the walk home, I noticed things I hadn't seen in weeks. The smell of wet earth, the creak of the gate, the way sunlight cut across the kitchen curtains. Small, ordinary details. Proof that I was still alive, still capable of noticing beauty even after betrayal. I made myself a cup of tea. The first sip burned my tongue, but I didn't mind. It reminded me I could still feel. Later that evening, I wrote another line in my notebook. He may have my signature, but he doesn't have my silence. That night I slept better than I had in months, not because things were better, but because for the first time I'd stopped pretending they weren't broken. When I woke the next morning, I knew what I had to do. I didn't have a plan yet, but I had something better. A spark. A pulse. A refusal to disappear quietly. And for a woman like me, a woman who'd built her entire life on quiet endurance, that refusal was the beginning of war. It was early evening when I heard the knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps, the kind that make your stomach twist before you even open the door. When I turned the knob, there they were. David and Clara. He stood slightly behind her, his arms crossed like he was guarding something, or someone. Clara's face was a practiced mask of politeness, the kind that says, asterisk, I'm in control here. Asterisk. Evelyn, she started, her tone soft, almost pitying. We thought we should come talk to you. It's important. I didn't answer. I just stepped aside and let them in. It was reflex. Old habits die hard when you've spent years being polite to people who secretly despise you. The living room felt smaller with them inside. The air seemed heavier, thicker, as if the walls themselves were listening. Clara walked in like she owned the place. The irony wasn't lost on me. She glanced around, eyes skimming the photographs, the fading furniture, the quiet remnants of the life I'd built with her father. David stayed standing. He looked restless, agitated. I couldn't tell if it was guilt or annoyance that fidgeted in his hands. Clara sat down, crossed one leg over the other, and folded her hands on her lap. Evelyn, she began again, I think we need to talk about your situation. My situation. That phrase burned. I sat opposite her, keeping my voice calm. You mean the situation where my husband's company and assets were somehow taken out of my reach? Or the situation where the house I live in is technically still in my name, but you've been calling the lawyers behind my back? Her lips curved faintly. Not quite a smile, more like a crack in a porcelain mask. Let's not make this harder than it already is. We just want what's fair. Fair. I repeated, my voice trembling with disbelief. You took everything. David finally spoke, his voice sharp and defensive. That's not true, Evelyn. You're exaggerating. You were. He paused, glanced at Clara, then looked away. You were always taken care of. You still are. But things have changed. Changed. I laughed softly. Your father dies, and suddenly I'm the outsider in my own life. That's what's changed. Clara sighed. A long performative exhale meant to look like patience. Evelyn, listen to me. Dad was complicated. He made choices you didn't understand. But we're trying to stabilize everything. The company is fragile, the estate. I cut her off. Don't patronize me. I was with your father through every struggle, every sleepless night. I was the one he came home to when you both wouldn't take his calls. For the first time, Clara's face faltered. Just for a moment. Then the mask returned. She leaned forward slightly. No one's denying that you were supportive. But emotional support doesn't translate to ownership. You know how business works. You weren't married to him for the company. You were married to him for love. Her words landed like a slap. And just like that, I understood her strategy. She wasn't here to negotiate. She was here to minimize me. To paint me as sentimental, emotional, naive. A woman whose worth dissolved the moment her husband's signature faded from the page. David spoke again, quieter now. Clara's right. This isn't about disrespect, Evelyn. We just need to move forward. Dad's affairs are complicated. You'll be taken care of. Taken care of. Like a pet. Like a fragile widow who should be grateful for crumbs. I felt something shift inside me then. A small, precise click of anger that didn't rise, didn't flare. Solidified. I looked at both of them, and for the first time I saw them clearly. Not as family, but as people who had written me out of their story, and now came to make sure I stayed gone. I see, I said finally. And what happens to me after I'm taken care of? Do I just disappear quietly? Is that what you're hoping for? Neither of them answered. Clara stood, smoothing her dress. Evelyn, I'm sorry you feel that way, but we can't keep living in the past. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for everyone. Her perfume lingered after she moved, cold and expensive. David followed her toward the door but hesitated. He turned, looking at me. Not cruelly, not kindly, just with that same weary detachment he'd worn at the funeral. Dad loved you, he said softly. But things are different now. And then they left. The silence they left behind was almost deafening. I stood there, staring at the door, feeling the ghost of their presence hanging in the air like a bad memory. For a while I didn't move. I just stood there, letting the quiet wrap around me. Then something strange happened. I started laughing. Not because anything was funny, but because I suddenly realized how predictable it all was. How utterly scripted their visit had been. The pitying tone, the false civility, the careful language that sounded like care but was really dismissal. They thought they were ending my chapter. They didn't realize they'd just written my prologue. I walked to the old desk by the window, the one I hadn't touched in months, and pulled open the drawer. Inside, beneath a few faded letters, was an envelope I hadn't looked at in years. It was addressed to me, in my husband's handwriting. He'd written it the year before he died. I remembered the night he'd sealed it quietly, told me, if anything ever happens, keep this safe. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a short note and a name, Raymond Cole. His attorney. His friend. His confidant. And below it, a line that made my pulse slow and steady. If they ever try to make you feel small, show them you were never standing beneath them. That night, for the first time since the funeral, I slept without tears. Because I finally had something I hadn't felt in months, a direction. Tomorrow I would call Raymond Cole. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a widow. I felt like a woman about to wake up. The next morning arrived quietly. No grand revelation, no sudden burst of courage. Just stillness. A kind that settles deep in your chest and asks, are you ready to stop surviving and start fighting? I brewed a cup of tea, my hand steady for the first time in weeks. As the steam rose, I stared out the window at the pale sunlight filtering through the curtains. The world looked the same, yet something inside me had shifted. The letter lay open on the table beside me. Raymond Cole. I whispered the name like a secret spell. By AM, I had his number dialed. He answered on the second ring, calm, composed, his voice carrying that quiet authority people develop after years of listening more than they speak. Mrs. Hayes, he said. I was hoping you'd call one day. Something in his tone made my eyes sting. You knew? I asked. I suspected, he said gently. Your husband told me enough to prepare for this possibility. I've been waiting. For a long second I couldn't speak. The lump in my throat felt like years of silence compacted into a single ache. Mr. Cole, I finally managed. I don't know where to start, he replied. Start by telling me everything they've taken. And so I did. I told him about the missing company shares, the blocked accounts, the visit from Clara and David, every lie disguised as concern, every polite theft hidden behind legal jargon. He listened without interrupting, only occasionally scribbling notes. When I finished, he said something I'll never forget. Evelyn, they underestimated you because you stopped defending yourself. That ends now. He invited me to his office the next day. His office was nothing like I expected, warm, filled with light, lined with old books and framed certificates. But what caught my eye wasn't the decor. It was a photograph on his desk. My husband, smiling beside him, hand on his shoulder. He trusted you, I said softly. He did, Raymond replied. He also made sure his trust was written down. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a brown folder sealed with an embossed emblem. Inside was a copy of a document, a trust agreement my husband had signed privately, months before his death. My name was right there. Primary beneficiary. I stared at the paper, my vision blurring. But, Clara said. She said what she needed to say to make you doubt yourself, he interrupted. They filed revisions after your husband's death, forged by the looks of it. It'll take time to prove, but the originals are intact. He made sure you'd never be erased. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The room tilted, then steadied again. I pressed my hand to my mouth, half laughing, half crying. He knew, I whispered. He knew they'd come for me. Raymond nodded. He didn't trust their restraint, but he trusted your resilience. Something bloomed in my chest then, not relief, not victory. Something quieter, deeper. a strange, glowing kind of strength that felt like remembering who I'd always been. That evening back home, I sat at my husband's old writing desk, the same one I'd avoided for months. I opened the drawer again, this time not searching for what I'd lost but ready to rebuild. One by one, I laid out the fragments of my life. Asterisk the photographs Clara had mocked. Asterisk the wedding ring that still fit perfectly. Asterisk the trust document Raymond had given me a copy of. They weren't just reminders anymore. They were evidence, proof of a life that had meaning, of a love that had left behind more than memories. For years I had defined myself as someone's wife, someone's stepmother, someone's something. But as I looked around that room, I realized something radical. I was also someone. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in months. The words came slowly, then freely, each one a reclamation. They thought grief would silence me. But grief doesn't silence, it distills. It burns away the unnecessary until only truth remains. When I put down the pen, I noticed the old houseplant by the window, withered, brittle, almost dead. It had been my husband's favorite. I hadn't watered it since the funeral. I picked up the watering can and poured slowly. The soil drank greedily, darkening under the moisture. For a long time I just stood there watching. That simple act, feeding life back into something forgotten, felt like an echo of what was happening inside me. Days turned into weeks. Raymond filed the case quietly, strategically. We didn't confront Clara or David, not yet. Every move had to be deliberate. In the meantime, I rebuilt my own rhythm. I walked every morning, cooked meals that tasted like home again, called old friends I'd pushed away. One morning, I caught my reflection in the mirror and didn't flinch. I saw the faint lines, the tired eyes, but also the quiet strength in my shoulders, the steady calm in my breath. I had stopped waiting for permission to exist. The call from Raymond came on a Sunday. The court accepted the petition, he said. They'll be summoned for questioning next week. I thanked him, my voice steady. After I hung up, I walked to the window and opened it wide. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain and earth. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was standing inside the ruins of my life. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a new one. A small smile found its way to my lips as I whispered the same line my husband had written in that note. If they ever try to make you feel small, show them you were never standing beneath them. It wasn't vengeance that filled me. It was clarity. Because rebirth isn't always loud or triumphant. Sometimes it's just the quiet realization that you're still here, and that's enough to terrify those who tried to bury you. And as the morning sun broke through the clouds, I felt it fully for the first time, the awakening. The woman they tried to erase was gone. The one who replaced her. She was just getting started. The first time I met Raymond Cole, I had no idea that a single conversation could shift the axis of my life. I arrived at his office feeling both anxious and oddly energized, carrying a folder of documents I had pulled together in the quiet hours of the morning. My husband's old papers, letters, the faintly yellowed will I thought was lost. Each one trembling in my hands like a small fragile hope. Raymond greeted me with a calm, firm handshake. His office smelled faintly of polished wood and leather, the kind of scent that makes you feel like serious things happen here. There was a photograph on his desk. My husband smiling, arm around Raymond's shoulder, both of them caught mid-laugh. For a moment, the memory of Robert's warmth struck me, a pang that almost made my resolve waver. But Raymond's voice cut through the nostalgia. Mrs. Harper, he said, his tone steady, I've reviewed your call notes. I need to see all the documents you brought. I placed the folder on his desk, my hands shaking slightly. He opened it carefully, almost reverently, and began to flip through the papers. This, he said, pointing at a set of documents that had once seemed benign, isn't just a medical authorization. This is a full durable power of attorney, financial, legal, everything. Your previous will was revoked the moment this was signed. And your son and his wife knew exactly what they were doing. I felt my stomach twist. My voice came out quiet, almost a whisper. So it's true. They erased me. Raymond didn't nod or shake his head. He just leaned back, hands clasped in front of him, as if weighing my reaction. Not erased, Mrs. Harper. Misled. Deceived. But not erased. There's a difference, and it matters legally. I blinked. My mind whirled. You mean I can fight it? Yes, he said, his voice firm now, carrying the authority that only decades of experience can give. If it was obtained under deception, we can revoke it. But it will require strategy, patience, and evidence. And most importantly, his eyes met mine. It will require you to step back into the fight. You'll need to see clearly who you are facing, and what they're capable of. I swallowed hard. The truth hit me like ice water. I had been passive for too long. The humiliation, the betrayal, the isolation, all of it had been wearing me down, making me question my own worth. And now, for the first time, I realized that passivity was a choice I no longer had to make. Raymond began methodically reviewing each paper. He pointed out how David and Clara had exploited my trust. The signatures, the notary stamps, the subtle language in the documents that masked the true extent of the power they had acquired. He even highlighted communications between Clara and the lawyer that revealed intent. Look here, he said, sliding a note across the desk. She's clearly discussing plans once you sign. They were prepared to move the assets the moment you gave them permission. I felt a wave of anger, sharp and steady, rise inside me. For months I had replayed their words in my mind. Asterisk, you're forgetful, Mom. We're doing this for your protection. Asterisk, and now, reading proof that it had all been orchestrated, I felt the humiliation transform into something else, a burning clarity. I can't believe I didn't see it, I whispered. I thought they were trying to help. Raymond shook his head slowly. Deception hides behind kindness because it works. They relied on your love for your son and your trust in them. But that doesn't make it legal or permanent. That's why we have a case. I nodded, letting the words sink in. The idea of fighting wasn't just legal strategy anymore. It felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I had thought lost. He stood and gestured toward the window. You need to understand, Mrs. Harper. This isn't about anger or revenge. This is about restoring your rights and protecting the estate your husband entrusted to you. And if we do it right, we can do it decisively, without them realizing we're already steps ahead. I inhaled deeply. The office smelled faintly of old books and possibility. For the first time since David and Clara had taken control, I felt a sense of power, quiet, steady, and deliberate. Raymond continued, explaining what I would need to do. Collect every relevant document, bank statements, emails, texts, witness statements, anything that could demonstrate manipulation or misrepresentation. He spoke of emergency motions to suspend David's control temporarily, the strategy for presenting evidence without alerting them prematurely, and the timeline for filing and hearings. Every word made my chest tighten. This was serious, complex, and yes, dangerous, but it was also mine to navigate. I'll be guiding you, he said, placing a firm hand over mine. But you need to be ready. They will try to intimidate, confuse, and manipulate you at every turn. But we'll anticipate it. You are not alone, Mrs. Harper. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, not from fear, but from the sudden sharp relief of having an ally. An honest one. Someone who saw the truth of what had been done to me and refused to let it stand. After that meeting, I left Raymond's office with my folder clutched like armor. The city streets felt brighter somehow, the air lighter. I walked slowly, thinking about everything I had endured, the betrayal, the humiliation, the subtle poison of David and Clara's lies. And now I felt something unfamiliar. The unmistakable spark of defiance. That night, I returned home and went straight to my husband's old desk. I spread the documents out, not to despair over them but to plan. The same desk where I had once sat in silent humiliation now became my command center. Every paper was a soldier, every note a strategy. I labeled, organized, and cataloged, feeling my mind sharpen with each movement. I looked out the window at the quiet night, the shadows of the trees stretching across the lawn. I realized that my fight would not be easy. It would demand patience, courage, and cunning. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I had a plan, a legal path, and someone on my side who respected my intelligence and my rights. For the first time, I allowed myself to whisper aloud, "I am not done. Not by a long shot." And in that whispered promise, I felt the first true pulse of what would come. A counterattack, deliberate and unstoppable, beginning quietly in the dark of my own home. The first morning after meeting Raymond, I awoke with a strange energy. It was as if every day of confusion, humiliation, and quiet fear had been compressed into a single ember, and now it glowed, waiting for me to breathe life into it. I started at my husband's desk, surrounded by the papers Raymond had helped me sort. Bank statements, old wills, correspondence, even faintly yellowed notes Robert had written in his precise handwriting. All of it became part of a growing tower of evidence. Each document was a tiny weapon, proof of the life that had been manipulated and almost stolen from me. Raymond had instructed me carefully. Every interaction counts, every communication matters. Collect emails, texts, receipts, phone call records, anything that demonstrates intent or misrepresentation. Keep a meticulous log of your daily interactions with David and Clara. I had never kept a log in my life, but that morning I started one. Every call, every text, every visit. I wrote it down in detail: time, place, what was said, tone of voice. Some days the process made me tremble. Others, it made me laugh at the audacity of the people I was documenting. It was during one of these hours, sorting through a folder of emails, that I found a thread between Clara and a lawyer. Her words were casual, almost innocent on the surface. "Once she signs, the assets are ours. Don't let her suspect anything. Make it look like routine paperwork." I read the line over and over, the ink blurring through my tears. I'd been betrayed not just by deceit, but by planning so cold and precise it felt clinical. And yet, it was exactly what I needed. Proof of intent, proof of manipulation, proof of everything Raymond needed to challenge their hold on my life. Over the following days, I became a creature of focus. I called banks, legal offices, accountants, anyone who might hold a piece of the puzzle. Some were sympathetic, others skeptical. A few treated me as though I were fragile and confused, but I reminded myself of Raymond's words. Asterisk, they will underestimate you. That is your advantage. Asterisk. Each piece of evidence I gathered was cataloged, copied, stored. I created a filing system with tabs and colored labels, each representing a type of proof. Financial manipulation, deceptive documents, witness statements, communications, and corroborating evidence from trusted sources. By the end of the first week, my home resembled a war room. Stacks of papers, notes pinned to corkboards, maps of bank branches and accounts. A visual manifestation of my strategy. But building the case was not only about documents. It was about understanding the people who had betrayed me. I reread every interaction I had with David and Clara over the past year. I cataloged phrases, behaviors, and moments of gaslighting. The feigned concern, the exaggerated warnings about my forgetfulness. The subtle insinuations that I was incapable of managing my affairs. Each memory was painful, yes, but it became data, evidence of manipulation. And with each recollection, the humiliation that had weighed on me for months transformed into something else. Determination. One evening, I received a call from Raymond. His voice was calm but sharp. "Evelyn, I've reviewed the documents. The evidence is strong enough to file an emergency motion. This will temporarily suspend your son's control over the finances and estate until the court reviews the matter." I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. For the first time, the idea of facing David and Clara no longer terrified me. I imagined the courtroom, the papers I had collected like armor, Raymond standing at my side, and me, for the first time in months, fully awake and prepared. The motion required precision. Every document had to be verified, every signature authenticated, every timeline exact. I spent hours checking and rechecking, making sure no detail was overlooked. Raymond guided me, patiently explaining the legal nuances, teaching me to think like someone who had to anticipate every tactic my adversaries might use. It wasn't easy. Exhaustion crept in. Some nights I would fall asleep at the desk, head resting on a pile of papers, dreaming of a courtroom where I stood alone against David and Clara, and won. Those dreams were both terrifying and exhilarating. I also began recording my daily interactions. Phone calls, visits, even small conversations in passing were noted. I bought a small digital recorder for moments I anticipated might become critical evidence. When David called to casually check in, pretending concern, I recorded the conversation discreetly. His words, meant to soothe, instead exposed the pattern of manipulation he had woven. With every piece of evidence I collected, I felt the transformation in myself. The woman who had sat quietly in her living room, humiliated, silenced, and deceived, was becoming someone else. Someone alert, disciplined, and quietly fierce. There were moments of despair, of course. The sheer volume of work, the emotional weight of betrayal, and the constant reminder that my own son had turned against me were crushing. But Raymond's presence was a stabilizing force. His confidence, his careful strategies, his unwavering belief in the legitimacy of my claim reminded me that I wasn't alone, and that I had never been powerless. After 2 weeks of meticulous preparation, we filed the emergency motion. I watched as Raymond submitted the documents, my hands clasped in front of me. The clerk accepted the papers with a nod, and I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. That night I returned home and looked at my desk, the piles of documents arranged neatly like soldiers on parade. I allowed myself a quiet moment of reflection. I wasn't seeking revenge. I wasn't seeking to humiliate David and Clara in return. I was reclaiming my life, my dignity, my future. And for the first time I understood the power of preparation, of clarity, and of having an unwavering ally. I wrote in my journal that night. Every page I hold is proof. Every note, every signature, every recollection. They cannot erase me. They thought they could. They were wrong. I also wrote something else, a line I would return to whenever doubt crept in. The strength I've lost through humiliation is nothing compared to the force I gained from knowledge and truth. That evening, as the house grew quiet, I felt a shift inside me. The fear that had gnawed at my chest for months was replaced with resolve. I wasn't naive. I wasn't powerless. I was ready. And though I didn't yet know how the confrontation would unfold, I knew one thing. The war had begun, and this time I would not be silent. I should have known it wouldn't be simple. I should have expected that once David and Clara realized I was no longer a passive obstacle, they would strike back. But nothing could have prepared me for the quiet ferocity of their retaliation. It began subtly, almost innocuously. First, my bank card stopped working. First, I thought it was a glitch. I stood at the ATM swiping my card, only for the screen to flash account access denied. My pulse quickened. I called the bank, politely, cautiously, and was informed that David's name was now primary on all accounts. My access? Secondary. Conditional. Limited. I felt a surge of panic, followed quickly by a simmering anger. My son. My own child. Controlling my finances like a stranger. But I remembered Raymond's words. Do not react blindly. Document everything. So I began. Every phone call to the bank, every attempt to access funds, every denial was meticulously logged. I recorded the conversations when permitted, wrote detailed notes afterward, and filed each incident in my growing case folder. Then came the neighbors. Clara began weaving rumors subtly. I overheard snippets of conversation when stepping outside to fetch the mail. Did you hear about Evelyn? She's not as sharp as she used to be. Poor woman, must be hard living alone at her age. It was calculated. Poison delivered gently, meant to isolate me further. But I refused to allow it. Every whispered comment, every insinuation was recorded, documented, noted in my journal. One afternoon an unfamiliar woman appeared at my door, clipboard in hand, a badge hanging from her neck. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Harper," she said with an overly sweet tone. "I'm here to conduct a routine assessment of your mental and financial well-being. It's just a precautionary measure for your own protection." My blood ran cold. The calm voice, the clipped words, the professional demeanor. Everything screamed manipulation. I recognized the game immediately. "I see," I replied evenly, holding her gaze. I appreciate your concern, but I've been in contact with my attorney. All relevant documents and statements are being handled by him. She hesitated, her smile faltering. I watched every movement, every flicker of emotion. After a brief exchange, she left, muttering something about reporting her visit. I closed the door slowly, my hands trembling, not with fear but with a fierce resolve. I immediately logged the incident, noting her badge, her speech, her mannerisms. Every detail mattered. I had learned that in this game precision was power. The next escalation was more direct. David called under the guise of concern. "Mom, you need to be careful," he said, voice sweet but tight. "The stress isn't good for you. We're just trying to protect you." I responded calmly, masking my fury. "I appreciate your concern, David, but all matters regarding finances and legal authority are now being handled by Raymond Cole. Please direct any further communication to him." He paused. The silence on the line was heavy. Then he added softly, almost a whisper, "You're making a mistake." I hung up and immediately documented the call, every word etched in my log. It was becoming a daily ritual. Anticipating their moves, noting them, recording them. Their attempts to intimidate me became almost predictable, but no less vicious. Emails came next, polite and measured on the surface, but with undertones of control. "For your own protection, please refrain from handling any estate matters until we discuss with Raymond. We are only looking out for you." Every message I saved, printed, and filed. Each one became another piece of evidence that revealed intent and manipulation. I was no longer helpless. I was vigilant, alert, ready. Even their appearances in the neighborhood began. I would see Clara at the corner shop, David lingering near the post office, casual, nonchalant, but always watching. I recorded these encounters with my phone, noting times, places, and details. And yet, through all of this, I found a strange sort of clarity. Each act of aggression, each attempt at intimidation, reinforced my resolve. They believed they could destabilize me. They believed I would flinch, break, and retreat. But with every attempt, I grew more deliberate, more precise, more aware. One evening, Raymond called. "Evelyn, the motion has been filed. We now have temporary suspension of David's control. But be prepared. They may escalate further. Expect interference, misdirection, and pressure tactics." I listened calmly, writing his words into my journal. But inside, a quiet fire burned. I had become a participant in a battle I hadn't wanted, yet one I was fully capable of managing. I remembered my husband's words from years ago, written in a note I kept close. "If they ever try to make you feel small, show them you were never standing beneath them." I repeated them silently, over and over, as if each repetition reinforced the armor around me. In the following weeks, I became methodical. I attended every meeting with the bank, with financial advisors, and with anyone David and Clara could try to influence. I carried my notes, my copies of correspondence, and my recorder. Every conversation was documented, every move anticipated. I also began to recognize patterns. David would attempt to feign concern after a small escalation. Clara would try to insert herself into interactions with neighbors to spread doubt. Their tactics were predictable, and that predictability became my strength. One afternoon, I received a text from Clara that made my blood run cold. "We're worried about your stress levels. Remember, you signed the papers. Just let us handle it for your own good." I took a deep breath, typed a single sentence, and sent it back. "All communication regarding finances or the estate will go through my attorney. Any further attempts to influence or intimidate me will be documented." I pressed send and immediately printed the message, noting the time and context in my growing dossier. By now, the stacks of papers on my desk had grown taller than I had ever imagined. Each folder, each note, each printed email became a symbol, not just of their deceit but of my awakening. I was no longer the passive widow they had tried to manipulate. I was an active participant in reclaiming what had been taken. Through all of this, I felt the strange satisfaction of control returning to me. The humiliation that had once threatened to crush me had been transformed into meticulous action, careful preparation, an unwavering focus. I went to bed that night exhausted, but there was a calm beneath the fatigue. I had faced the subtle and overt attacks from David and Clara. I had anticipated, recorded, and countered. The legal motion was in motion, the evidence was irrefutable, and I was ready for whatever escalation might come next. The war was no longer theoretical. It was real, and I was no longer hiding. For the first time in months, I slept with the knowledge that I had reclaimed my narrative, and that each act of antagonism from David and Clara only strengthened my resolve. It happened on a gray, rain-soaked morning. One of those days where the sky presses down on you and makes the world feel smaller, heavier. I had driven to the bank to check a document Raymond had asked me to confirm. The streets were quiet, except for the occasional splash of tires through puddles. I parked, took a deep breath, and reached for my keys, only to find them gone. My heart stopped. My car, the one small piece of independence I had maintained, was missing. I called the police and then the bank manager and finally Raymond. Each call confirmed my worst fear. David and Clara had arranged for the car to be repossessed for my safety, citing vague warnings about my stress and supposed forgetfulness. I remember standing in the empty parking space, rain dripping from my hair, gripping the steering wheel that wasn't there, and feeling the weight of every humiliation all at once. Every calculated deception, every casual dismissal of my authority, every attempt to make me doubt my own mind, it coalesced into a crushing wave of despair. I sank to the wet curb, my coat soaked through, and let the tears come. I let the rage, the shame, the helplessness, the betrayal pour out in a torrent. I whispered into the rain words that had been trapped in my chest for weeks. Even my wheels are theirs. Everything I had they think they can take. But in the midst of that despair, a strange, sharp clarity pierced through. The humiliation, the manipulation, the theft of my agency, it was fuel. A bitter, burning fuel that could either consume me or drive me forward. I stood slowly, pulling my coat tighter, and whispered a promise to myself. I will not let them erase me. I went home that day drenched, exhausted, and trembling, yet strangely resolute. The documents, the records, the meticulous logs I had built over the past weeks were not just paper. They were my armor, my strategy, my proof that I had not failed, that I had been aware, that I had fought even when the odds were stacked against me. That evening, I drove past my husband's grave. The sky still heavy, the rain now a fine mist. I parked at the edge of the cemetery and walked the familiar path lined with oak trees. The smell of wet earth was sharp and grounding. I stopped at Robert's headstone, tracing the letters of his name with trembling fingers. Robert, I whispered, my voice breaking. I let them turn me into a shadow. I let them make me doubt myself. I allowed them to manipulate my mind, my life. I thought I had lost everything. A long pause. I could hear only the rain falling softly around me, the distant hum of the city beyond the cemetery walls. And then I whispered the next words, not in despair, but in determination. But I will make this right. I will not let their deceit win. Not my life, not my husband's legacy, not the truth. I rested my hands on the cool stone and closed my eyes. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of moral clarity. The war wasn't just about money or control. It was about justice, integrity, and reclaiming my place in the life I had earned. I remembered Raymond's guidance. Every step must be deliberate. Every action documented. Every word measured. And I realized something crucial: the enemy wasn't invincible. They relied on my confusion, my hesitation, my fear. Remove that and they had no leverage. I left the cemetery with a renewed sense of purpose. My footsteps were lighter, my resolve firmer. The car could be taken. The accounts could be blocked. The neighbors could whisper their doubts. But none of that could take what was now inside me. Clarity, focus, and the awakening of my own strength. Back at home, I reorganized my files. The logs, the emails, the notes from encounters with David and Clara. Everything had its place. I labeled, sorted, and reviewed each piece. It was no longer chaos, it was strategy. Every document was a soldier, every note a weapon, every memory a guide. And then I did something symbolic. I put on Robert's watch, the one he had always worn, polished and golden, ticking steadily against my wrist. It was more than a timepiece. It was a reminder of endurance, precision, and the quiet power that comes with patience. I stood in front of the mirror, wearing his watch, and spoke aloud. I am not finished. I am not defeated. I am prepared, aware, and awake. They will not make me small. It was the first time I felt the weight of my fear shift into strength. The humiliation that had nearly crushed me had become fuel. The betrayal that had nearly silenced me had become clarity. That night I wrote in my journal, recording every emotion, every incident, every revelation. They thought grief would keep me passive. They thought humiliation would keep me silent. They were wrong. Every action they took to suppress me has only built my resolve. I am awake now, and every step forward will be deliberate. By the next morning I had a plan. Not a vengeful one, but a deliberate, tactical one. Every legal document would be in order. Every record of deceit catalogued. Every witness ready. And with Raymond guiding me, we would bring this fight into the light, exposing manipulation and reclaiming what had been wrongfully taken. I realized that my moral awakening wasn't about hating David or Clara. It wasn't about retribution. It was about reclaiming myself. It was about proving that deception could not define me, that fear could not dictate my life, and that the quiet dignity of truth was far more powerful than any lie or manipulation. And as I lay down that night, exhausted but unbroken, I understood this. The war had officially begun. I wasn't just fighting for my finances or my inheritance. I was fighting for my life, my autonomy, and the integrity of my own spirit. The darkness of betrayal no longer suffocated me. It illuminated the path forward, sharpened my resolve, and reminded me that even when everything seems lost, the choice to rise, to reclaim, and to resist always remains. I closed my eyes and whispered one final promise. This ends with truth. Not fear. Not deceit. Truth. And in that moment I felt a quiet, unshakable peace. The enemy had escalated, yes, but I had awakened. And nothing, not even my own son, could take that from me. The day of the hearing arrived with a weight I had never known before. I had spent countless hours preparing, documents organized, evidence cataloged, and every conversation, every text, every misstep by David and Clara recorded and analyzed. I felt the strange duality of anticipation and dread, a tension in my chest that made my heart pound like a drum. Raymond accompanied me to the courthouse. His presence was steady, a calm anchor in the storm of nerves that threatened to overwhelm me. As we walked through the massive doors, the chill of marble floors and polished wood seeped into my bones. Courtrooms had always seemed intimidating to me, a place where authority, words, and evidence combined into a final judgment. But today, I felt a quiet confidence I hadn't known since David first deceived me. I had my truth, my proof, and my resolve. David and Clara were already there, seated together, the picture of polished civility. David's eyes flicked toward me briefly, a flash of surprise that quickly disappeared behind a mask of smug control. Clara gave me a tight, polite smile, the same one she had worn countless times when trying to disarm me with feigned concern. But today I wasn't disarmed. The courtroom slowly filled with the low murmur of onlookers. I took a seat, keeping my folder tightly in my lap. Raymond leaned over and whispered, "Stay calm. Speak clearly. Let the evidence do the work." The hearing began. David's lawyer was first. He portrayed me as confused, forgetful, and incapable of understanding the consequences of my own actions. He cited my age, my recent health scares, even subtle comments I had made in previous meetings. He painted me as fragile, a woman too overwhelmed to manage her affairs. David took the stand next. His voice was calm, smooth, rehearsed. I only acted out of love. Everything I did was for her protection. I was merely helping her manage her finances. Clara followed, tears glinting in her eyes, soft and controlled. She asked us to handle things. We only followed her wishes. It was all for her safety. A hush fell over the courtroom. Their words were a carefully constructed narrative meant to make me seem dependent, weak, and in need of control. For a moment I felt the old pangs of doubt, the whispers of shame creeping in from the back of my mind. But then I remembered Raymond's preparation. I remembered the documents, the evidence, the carefully recorded deceit. I remembered the long nights cataloging every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to undermine me. It was my turn. I rose slowly, feeling the familiar tremor of nerves, but steadying myself with the awareness of my own power. Every eye in the room seemed to focus on me, the silence thick and expectant. I spoke clearly, deliberately. I raised a son who knows every one of my weaknesses, and he used them all against me. I did not lose my memory. I lost my trust. I paused, letting the words settle. I could see the judge's face harden, the lawyer's pen scratching notes. I continued, my voice gaining strength. I signed what I thought was a simple medical authorization. I trusted my son and his wife. I believed they acted in my best interest. But the documents I signed were designed to mislead me. They did not warn me, they did not advise me, and they concealed the truth. They manipulated my love, my trust, and my reliance on them. I presented the evidence methodically. First, the original medical authorization that included financial and legal power disguised in formal, misleading language. Then, texts and emails between Clara and the lawyer discussing how they planned to move assets once I signed. I handed the court audio recordings where I asked clear questions, showing I had not been warned or fully informed. Raymond guided me subtly with a nod, a glance, his confidence bolstering my own. I felt a strange exhilaration. The humiliation, the fear, the deceit, all of it had brought me here, and now it was being overturned by truth. As I concluded, I looked directly at David and Clara. Their faces, so often masks of control and condescension, showed cracks. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The silence that followed my testimony was more powerful than any word I could speak. The judge took a long moment, reviewing the evidence, consulting with clerks. The tension in the room was palpable. I felt my hands trembling slightly, but not from fear, from the sheer intensity of the moment, from the awareness that years of manipulation and betrayal were about to be confronted in a space where truth mattered. Finally, the judge spoke. After reviewing the evidence, testimony, and documentation provided, it is clear that the power of attorney was obtained under deception. The court finds in favor of Mrs. Evelyn Harper. I could hardly breathe. The words hung in the air, heavy with relief and triumph. The power of attorney is hereby voided. The previous will of the late Robert Harper is reinstated. Legal restrictions are placed on David Harper and Clara Harper to prevent financial exploitation and undue influence. I felt a wave of emotion I could not contain. Tears slipped down my cheeks, but they were not tears of despair. They were tears of quiet victory. The months of fear, humiliation, and manipulation had led to this moment. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension in my chest release. Raymond placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. "You stayed strong, you stayed meticulous, and you told the truth. Justice has been served." I looked at David and Clara. The shock and anger on their faces were evident. They had believed their calculated plan would go unnoticed, that their manipulation would secure control over my life and my husband's estate. And now in the courtroom, their deception had been stripped bare. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth was enough. The integrity I had reclaimed was far more powerful than any revenge could be. As we left the courtroom, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in months. The stacks of documents, the long nights of preparation, the careful recording of every interaction, all of it had mattered. Every step I had taken in reclaiming my life had led to this moment of vindication. Later at home, I sat quietly in the living room, reflecting on everything that had transpired. The fear, the shame, the betrayal. All of it had been transformed into clarity, strength, and resilience. I had learned a painful but vital truth. Trust is not about blind faith. It is about respect, honesty, and accountability. And when those are absent, even the closest bonds can be weaponized against you. I wrote in my journal that night. I did not fight out of anger. I fought to reclaim my life. I did not seek to humiliate. I sought justice. And in the end, truth prevailed. I looked at the framed photograph of Robert, smiling as he had decades ago. I imagined him nodding, proud not of the fight itself, but of the integrity with which it had been waged. For the first time in months I felt whole. Not because the money, the will, or the estate had been restored, though that was a relief, but because I had reclaimed my agency, my voice, and my dignity. The courtroom had been a battleground, but it had also been a proving ground. I had learned that strength is not measured by aggression, but by persistence, clarity, and unwavering adherence to truth. I had learned that humiliation can be transformed into power when combined with preparation, strategy, and courage. And as I closed my journal, the weight of the past months began to lift. I had faced the betrayal of my son and his wife, exposed their manipulation, and reclaimed what was rightfully mine. I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. This was not the end of the story, but it was a victory that mattered. A victory not of revenge but of integrity, courage, and moral clarity. Weeks later I found myself walking along the shoreline near my new home. The small cottage overlooked the ocean, the waves rolling in like a steady heartbeat, calming, persistent, and endless. I had chosen this place intentionally, a space far from the tension, manipulation, and betrayal I had endured. It was mine, and for the first time in years I felt the weight of true freedom. Inside I had opened a fresh bank account in my name alone. No power of attorney, no hidden clauses, no fear of someone else controlling my life. The sense of independence was intoxicating. I arranged my small belongings carefully, each item a symbol of autonomy reclaimed. I planted flowers along the windowsill, tiny bursts of color that seemed to mirror the quiet joy beginning to take root in me. Marjorie came to visit one afternoon. She looked around the sunlit rooms, tears glistening in her eyes. "Evelyn," she whispered, embracing me, "I'm so proud of you. You fought for yourself and you won." I laughed softly, a sound that had been missing from my life for far too long. I thought I lost everything, I admitted. But really I only lost the illusion that I was powerless. The garden outside bloomed as if in celebration of my liberation. I spent hours tending to it. Each seed I planted a tiny promise: growth, renewal, and resilience. I realized that life could flourish even after betrayal and hardship, that beauty could emerge from the darkest soil. At night I would sit by the window writing in my journal. Sometimes I wrote letters I would never send, to David and Clara, to the past that had sought to crush me. Other times I wrote reflections on trust, integrity, and the quiet strength of perseverance. Each entry was a reminder that I had survived, and that survival was not just endurance. It was reclaiming the self I had almost lost. One evening I spoke aloud, almost to the ocean itself. I signed away my fear that day. I unknowingly gave control. And in doing so I signed something else too, my awakening. It wasn't a dramatic proclamation, nor did it need to be. The truth had a quiet power all its own. I understood now that trust is not paperwork. It's respect, honesty, and care. And protection without respect is simply control in disguise. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of gold and lavender. I felt a deep, steady peace settle over me. My life was my own again. I didn't need to gloat or seek revenge. The court had rendered justice, yes, but the real victory was within me. I had survived humiliation, deceit, and manipulation, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more alert to the truths of human nature. I spoke to the camera of my own life, as if sharing a story with the world. My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm years old, and I finally learned that protection without respect is control in disguise. I reclaimed my voice, my dignity, and my life. If this story moved you, tell me, what would you have done in my place? I love reading your thoughts, so share them below. And for more stories like this, remember to subscribe. I smiled, turning my gaze back to the horizon. The waves whispered their eternal rhythm, reminding me that life continues, relentless, healing, and full of possibility. I had been lost, deceived, and humiliated. But in the end, I had found something more important than money, more important than control: my courage, my clarity, and my freedom. And as the first stars appeared in the evening sky, I felt a profound sense of serenity. I was whole. I was awake. I was free.